Gives me great, great pleasure to say, welcome, KrisAnne.
Thank you, Mr. Eddie. I'm so excited to be here. I missed you guys last year, so I'm happy to have the opportunity to be with you today and to discuss a few things with you about today. You know, I have really enjoyed all the speakers, because if you notice, there's a common thread that moves through what you're hearing today. That's sitting around and joining meetings. There we go. Come on. Oh, man. Don't you love technology? I think I have to stand in this spot right here. All right, go ahead and advance the slide for me. We'll just fall back on. Push the space bar button. Give me one slide. It's not working. There we go. All right. Okay. If you notice, there's some threads that just keep moving through all the speakers. And as a teacher, because that's what I am at heart, as a teacher, I understand that repetition is the key to education. And so I don't mind, from the learning perspective, hearing the same people say the same things over and over again. Because if you admit, we're all saying the same thing, but we're doing it in different ways. It's kind of like where I live in Florida. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting a church. Why do you got so many churches? Well, because you can say the same things in a lot of different ways, and it appeals to different people in different ways. So I'm hearing over and over again, get up, get out, get active, right? How many of you heard that today? Is that the overwhelming? Get up, get out, get active. But I want to just recognize something, because I've been doing this now, I'm going on 11 years. If you had told me 11 years, I'd be doing this for 11 years, no way. 11 years now, I've been standing and teaching. And I think that I have a little bit of insight of what happens when you leave. You see, in these meetings, you get real excited, you get real charged up, and you're like, yeah! I'm going to join this group, and I'm going to go join that group, and I'm going to get this t-shirt, and I'm going to get that book. And then you go. And then the real world smacks you in the face. You see, the bottom line is, rallies are to encourage people. I mean, this is pretty much what this is, a rally. Rallies are to encourage the troops. But we also have to give marching orders and redistribute the tools necessary to be active and victorious in the battle. And I feel like that's what my role is. My role is to put in your rucksack the tools that you need to be victorious out there. Because the most important thing we can do today is to convince and convert. That's the whole purpose of communication, to convince and convert. But if we're honest, we're uncomfortable speaking to people we don't know. Even about stuff that we think we know a lot about. And if we're also honest, those who are opposed to gun ownership are not shy, are they? They're bold. They're in your face. They're downright rude and obnoxious. And that can be intimidating. But what we need to do is to get grounded into the essentials. And that's what I want to give you today. Some grounding in the essentials. I want to give you the tools that give you the ability to create your own, what I call 30-second elevator speech. Because you need something that you have memorized. Your go-to. I'm going to bump into somebody at the grocery store, and I'm going to start this conversation. Now, I quite often get criticized for teaching the choir. Problem is, it's my experience in 11 years that the choir needs a lot of teaching. Can I get an amen? we're totally honest with ourselves, we wouldn't be in the battle today if we hadn't accepted a lie from the beginning.
That's right. Amen.
You know what the chief lie is? Don't talk about politics and religion in public. Are you stinking kidding me? That's the whole purpose. Our founders incorporated the First Amendment so we would talk about religion and politics in public. But we've been lied to, we've been convinced, and we've been intimidated to speak about the things that we're passionate about. How many of you realize that's not a problem for me? Now, my undergraduate degree is in biochemistry, and I was a linguist in the military before I became a lawyer, but my parents will tell you that I was born a lawyer. That I came out the womb just like I am today, and they knew exactly where I was going. But I want us to understand there are some distinct principles and differences that we need to recognize before we get into this discussion with those, and I won't call them enemies, I will just call them those who don't think like we do. We got to know these things. First off, we must understand that the right to keep and bear arms is essential to the preservation of life, liberty, and property.
Amen.
Essential. If something is essential, can you do without it? No. We must also recognize, because I think sometimes we even are sold the bill of goods to ourselves. We convince ourselves of some things. That's why you get the guys of, well, you know, I'm pro-gun, but I don't know why you shouldn't have to register. I mean, we need to get the guns out of the hands of the bad guys. You know why they say that? Because we've been busy teaching people that it's gun owners that want to hurt people. See, we need to take back the narrative and realize that those who are fighting for the right to keep and bear arms are doing so because they want to preserve life and liberty, not destroy it. You see, those who support the right to keep and bear arms do so because they not only want to protect life and liberty and property for themselves, but for their neighbor. You see, we know the second commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. Because the first great commandment is to love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. The second commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said through all these things, through these two things, all others fall into place. Those that fight for the right to keep and bear arms know that we're ensuring that future generations can be a free people as members of a government of the people, not subjects to a government over the people. These are the people that support the right to keep and bear arms. We train because we love our neighbor, because we want to preserve life, because we want to preserve liberty. We go to the range. We practice. We don't practice speaking about our rights enough. We don't practice engaging in our rights enough. Going to the range is just a fraction of this. You live in a state where open carry doesn't require a permit. There shouldn't be an empty hip in the room. There shouldn't be an empty hip at the grocery store. There shouldn't be an empty hip on the street. Because just as I can say, you don't have a right to not be offended, and I have a right to be offensive, then you must also understand that by speaking my mind on a regular basis, I'm training people to hear, whether they agree with it or not. And by carrying on a regular basis, you're training people to not fear. What happened in Virginia, all the armed people there, How amazing was that to see a crowd of 100,000 people open carry and nobody was shot or killed? How does that not undermine every single narrative being forced down our throat today by the politicians, the pundits, and the media? But here's the thing. Those who support the right to keep and bear arms are doing so because they want to secure and preserve life, liberty, and property. Those who oppose the right to keep and bear arms, whether it's intentional or not, support the exact opposite. You see, there are those who ignorantly support gun bans. Ignorantly. They don't realize that what they're doing is actually supporting slavery, oppression, and despotic rule. And they believe so, I think, because they have been successfully convinced of one eternal error. They have been taught to believe that those in power actually respect life. That those in power actually respect liberty and private property. You see, there is absolutely nothing in history that would support that false delusion of hope. And there is everything in history that shows us that when society is disarmed, the people are enslaved. Disarming the people has never helped one single minority population in the world. As a matter of fact, disarming a society only ensures that the minority populations will be the first to be enslaved. And they ignorantly support this because we are not convincing and converting them effectively of the truth. Slavery is not possible in a society where the people are armed. Now remember, there are those who support gun bans and controlling law-abiding citizens keeping and bearing arms ignorantly, but there are those who do so knowingly. And those who want to take your right to keep and bear arms do so knowingly because they're power hungry. They lack respect for life, and their only goal is to dominate liberty and property. See, this is what we've got to get into our heads, because in our politically correct society where you don't talk about politics or religion, we've made excuses for people who are power hungry based on party affiliation. I want to read something to you. This is a direct reading of a text, and I want you to think about where it comes from. We uphold the right of individuals to keep and bear arms, a natural, inalienable right that predates the Constitution and is secured by the Second Amendment. Lawful gun ownership enables Americans to exercise their God-given right of self-defense for the safety of their homes, their loved ones, and their communities. We salute the Congress for defending the right to keep and bear arms by preventing presidents from installing new liberal majority on the Supreme Court. Confirmation to the court of additional anti-gun justices would eviscerate the Second Amendment's fundamental protections. Already local officials in the national capital and elsewhere are defying court decisions upholding an individual right to keep and bear arms as affirmed by the Supreme Court in Heller and McDonough. We support firearm reciprocity legislation to recognize the right of law-abiding citizens, Americans, to carry firearms to protect themselves and their families in all 50 states. We support constitutional carry statutes and salute the states that have passed them. We oppose ill-conceived laws that would restrict magazine capacity or ban the sale of the most popular and common modern rifle. We also oppose any effort to deprive individuals of their right to keep and bear arms without due process of law. Sounds like a good plan, doesn't it? Do you know what that is? That's the Republican Party platform. Now, I live in Florida. We have a Republican House, a Republican Senate, a Republican governor. And we were leading the way for red flag laws. We now have a Republican majority in the Senate who want to expand the red flag laws that are here, that are in Florida. And we have a member of the House who has written a piece of legislation to repeal the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act, our Red Flag Law Act. And he can't get a single person to co-sponsor with him, and he can't get anybody in the Senate to write a bill to go to sister with it. How can these Republicans claim to believe what they believe and then say they don't knowingly deprive us of our rights? They are knowingly depriving us of our rights, and they're doing so because they're power hungry and they have no respect for life, no respect for liberty, and all they want to do is dominate and rule over your lives. And I don't care if they call themselves conservatives or not. You see, these people are very artful. Our founders called them cunning politicians. Artful and cunning politicians. You see, they know how to motivate the ignorant by the greatest human deception, the contrived crisis. They know how to control the powerless, to corral the weak, to convince the morally depleted population to organize and come against their neighbor. Do you know what one of our founders, his name is William Pitt the Younger, said? Necessity is the plea for every infringement of human freedom. It is the argument of tyrants, and it is the creed of slaves. Every time there is a shooting and someone says, we need to control guns, we have the senators in Florida trying to push forward this new level of gun control. And it's the right thing to do because we have to save our children. According to William Pitt, when you hear those things, it's necessary to deprive you of your God-given rights because of A, B, C, or D. William Pitt says those people who say those words are doing you a favor. Because you don't have to guess who they are. They're classifying themselves as either tyrants or slaves. See, part of getting up, getting out, standing up, and speaking out is being able to get into the face of these people who are supposed to be representing you, who are lying to you, who are power-hungry, immoral people, and telling them exactly what you feel. And doing it with such a boldness that you don't care who's watching or what they say back. This is the spirit of the Sons of Liberty. This is the spirit of the Committees of Correspondence. This is the spirit that built America, and that's what makes America exceptional. We don't cower at politicians because about time we start acting like Americans instead of like socialists.
Come on.
Because the bottom line is, when you won't speak about politics, when you won't speak about religion, when you won't challenge politicians, you look more like a socialist than you do an American. And we've got to overcome this. Knowledge is power. I want to empower you today. I want to make sure that you have the knowledge necessary to convince and convert. And we need to not be afraid to speak to people we don't know about things they don't know. Because the bottom line is this: people don't know what they don't know. We already heard this morning, people believe based on their hearts, not on their heads. We have to reach people at a human level. We need to tell them, we need to ask them what they believe. We need to challenge them. Do you know the most powerful tool to convince and convert any person on the planet?
Facts.
No, not facts. Because you can speak facts at somebody all day long, and their brainwashing will dismiss you as a tinfoil hat, Bible-thumping, pearl-clutching idiot. The most powerful tool to convince and convert is a question. A question is the computer virus of the mind. You shoot facts at them, you know what they're going to do? They're going to go to Snopes and figure out you're wrong. You shoot facts at them, they're going to go check with the experts on CNN, MSNBC. And you know what? Today, they'll even find those idiot experts on Fox. You want to change the way somebody thinks? You plant a virus in their mind they cannot escape from. How do I know this? Well, because I'm a Socratic teacher, and that's what Socrates did. That's the most valuable thing. But I also know from experience, I am a recovering socialist. Hardcore socialist. I believe that the planet was infested by people, that animals had more right to live here than people. I believe that everybody should have no technology whatsoever, that the people were a plague on the planet. And I believe that God was a maniacal, evil marionette who got pleasure out of making people miserable. Now, someone can plant a question in my mind and change that. My mind. My husband will tell you I'm pretty stubborn. You probably could gather that. That's how powerful this is. So I want to walk you through, see, we've got to learn how to phrase things in questions. We've got to learn how to do things. Wisdom and knowledge is the key, but if we do not own that wisdom and knowledge, and we're just simply repeating facts, then you won't be able to think properly to convince and convert, because regurgitation is not conversion. Samuel Adams said, "No people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved. But on the contrary, when the people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders." You see, every problem that we have in government in America today can be boiled down to one simple fact. Americans have been deliberately dumbed down into a universal ignorance about their liberty. And since I'm here to talk to you about basics, right? When you're a foot soldier, you don't carry a howitzer in your backpack. I want to give you the tools you can carry to the grocery store, to the hardware store, to the Thanksgiving dinner. Eric and Jan, they carry the howitzers. You can support them by buying their ammunition. But we need foot soldiers. We need people in the streets. People reaching people. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Now, I have a whole lesson that kind of talk, and that's 30 minutes on the grammar and the organization of this sentence in subject, matter, object that would blow away every argument by every single government attorney on the planet. But that's not what we're here to, because the average American doesn't even know anything about grammar. You see, the government attorneys will tell you that it's all about the well-regulated militia. I've read these briefs. They tell you, well, the Second Amendment is all about the well-regulated militia. And that's not you and me, you see, because well-regulated means government. And the reason we know well-regulated means government is because nobody regulates as well as the government. Am I lying, Eric? $200,000 brains think like that. My husband will tell you gotta go to college to get that done. Now we know that's not true, so how do we develop the right questions to get the right answers? Because I'm going to try to teach you how to be fluent in your tools, so no matter who you come up against, you can pull a tool out of your backpack and convince and convert. What are the principles behind the rights to keep and bear arms? Not the words. Because if you start quoting James Madison, somebody's going to look at you and say, why would you quote him? He was a rich elite white slave owner who wanted to oppress women and keep minorities in chains. You see, these people mean something to us, but they mean something to the other side as well. But it means the opposite. You can't argue Stalin's logic to us. Now, there's a principle in truth that said truth is truth no matter who says it. So if Adolf Hitler says 2 + 2 = 4, then you know it still equals 4. But the bottom line is we're heart-driven, not mind-driven. So we got to stick to what works. Who are the militia and what is a free state? George Mason in 1788, talking about Sir William Keith, said 40 years ago, so we're talking about the mid-1740s, when the resolution of enslaving America was formed in Great Britain, the British Parliament was advised by an artful man who was governor of Pennsylvania. Now, in the mid-1740s, the governors were appointed by the king in most of the colonies, not elected by them. And this governor of Pennsylvania sounds like the governor of Virginia, doesn't it? Saying the best and most effectual way to what? Enslave the people was to disarm them. But he said, don't do it openly. You see, if you show up on their doorstep to disarm them, they'll shoot you in the forehead. You have to first weaken them and let them sink gradually. I have a class on video over there on my table called America Disarmed, about how the royal governor of Massachusetts by the name of Thomas Gage effectively in 1774 set about to disarm one town, and how our American colonists responded to one governor trying to disarm one town. Patrick Henry said, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past. You want to know how to fight the tyrants of today? Learn how they defeated the tyrants of yesterday. Study, as we do in that DVD over there called America Disarmed, how the American colonists defeated defeated the 1774 movement to disarm the people. And it wasn't because they had a majority of people on their side. He said, do not do it openly, but weaken them and let them sink gradually. You know, make it difficult for them to get the ammunition. Make it complicated for them to get the guns and the parts that they need. Put enough soldiers in their midst so they feel safe and they don't think they need to defend themselves anymore. He continues and says, I ask, but who are the militia? They consist now of what? The whole body of the people, except what? A few public officers. Notice the distinction. We're talking about principles here. The right to keep and bear arms is a principle of how the people are not enslaved. And he's saying the militia is the whole body of the people, which does not include the government. He says, but I don't know who will be the militia of the future day. If that paper on the table gets no alteration, it may not consist of all people, high and low, and rich and poor. That's a pretty clear and definite definition of the whole body of people, isn't it? See, when you read these things, it's very mind-stunning to me that there's even an argument to be made by these brainiacs. Noah Webster. Before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed as they are in almost every kingdom in Europe. Publius was talking about this today, the alteration of our Constitution. The indoctrination of our brains into this party loyalty, this personality cult material that we deal with today. Do you know how many people are supporting the USMCA when the USMCA sells out your sovereignty and allows 3 foreign people, 2 Mexicans and a Canadian, or 2 Canadians and a Mexican, to write rules, laws, and regulations on you? That's what the USMCA does. How many of you want 2 Mexicans and a Canadian to decide your right to keep and bear arms? Well, that's what the USMCA does. But because we've gone into cult of personality and party worship, we can't openly challenge. Plus, we can't talk about politics in public anyway. Look what he says. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword. Why? Because the whole body of the people are armed. Now, I get this question all the time. I know you've heard it. Well, the Second Amendment doesn't contemplate military-style weapons. You shouldn't have tanks and, big guns, the big scary ones. I want you to read what Noah Webster says here. He says, because the whole body of the people are armed and constitute a force superior to any band of regular troops, that's what our founders called the military, that can be raised on any pretense, no matter how vast and massive the danger. The people still out-arm the government. He says, why? Because then Congress cannot execute and enforce unjust, oppressive, and unconstitutional laws because the jealousy of the people, because of their knowledge of their rights and their liberties, the jealousy of the people will be inspired and ignited to oppose everything, and we also have the power to oppose because we out-arm them. We're talking about principles here. So what does well-regulated really mean? I mean, our founders weren't silent on that at all either. This is Richard Henry Lee. He says, whereas to preserve liberty It's essential that, what's that again? Are you seeing a pattern here? See these brain trusts out there talking about how it's not an individual right, obviously have never sought past their Marxist textbooks and their ignorant professors. Because it's right there in writing. The whole body of the people always possess arms. Now, if something is essential, can you do without it? If you're always doing something, is there ever a moment when you're not doing it? So what Richard Henry Lee is saying is, if you're not packing right now, you're not preserving liberty. But look at what he says, because this is where the well-regulated comes into play. And be taught alike, especially when young, how to use them. How do you get a well-regulated militia? Well, you well-train them, because that's what well-regulated means. It means well-trained. It's like a factory worker that does the same movement over and over again without error and without deviation. How do you ensure a free state? You train up your children not only in the skill of keeping and bearing arms, but the principles upon which they know why they're doing that. It doesn't do any good to teach your children and take them to the range and show them how to keep and bear arms and how to reload and how weapons retention and all this great stuff if they don't know what they're fighting for. Because the textbooks are teaching them the exact opposite, you know. Colton, my son, is 13. He's been shooting since he was 3 or 4. Now, we didn't start him with an AR. We started him with a BB gun. But at that age, that was enough for him to understand the power and the responsibility that he wielded. Now at 13, the kid, I don't know, he's just the most amazing shot. And I'm very disappointed in my state that I, as a parent, cannot decide that my child is appropriately capable of carrying a firearm for his protection at the age of 13. And I bet in this crowd, that statement, even in this crowd, is radical. That's how brainwashed we've become. In 1774, when the military governor Thomas Gage tried to disarm Boston, 20,000 people from aged 16 to 60 started marching on Boston. How do you have the courage and the skill to march at 16? You possessed it at 13. And you were training at 5. See, we got to think differently. I don't know if you saw this clip, but Eric Holder, as a U.S. attorney, speaking before a college, said it's not enough to have anti-government campaigns on Monday and then flyers on Friday. He says we need to speak every day. We need to be in our schools with public service announcements every day. He actually said this. He said, we need to brainwash people to think differently about guns. And if we're honest with ourselves, as much as we hate it, some of it is still in our heads. Which is why they say, well, I don't understand why you wouldn't want to keep the guns out of the hands of bad guys. I do, but I just want to do it differently than you do. I want to keep the guns out of the hands of the bad guys by making sure all the good guys have all the guns they can carry. Patrick Henry. He's a little fiery like I am. The background is, this is the Virginia ratifying debate. And one of the delegates was giving a speech. I don't know if you know this, but there were like 150 amendments proposed for the Bill of Rights. And they wanted to whittle it down to the most essential. And so at the Virginia ratifying debates, they were arguing about whether the right to keep and bear arms was necessary in the Bill of Rights. And one of the delegates said, you know, it's not that we don't have that right. He was not trying to argue that we don't have the right. He just said it's not necessary to put in the Bill of Rights. He said it's not necessary, number one, because it's ingrained in our psyche. After everything that we've gone through as Americans, all the oppression and what we've had to do to overcome that, there is no way an American will ever allow their government to disarm them again. He said, not only that, we're not kingdoms anymore. You see, when you live in a kingdom, you can get a king to make a promise with you. English kings actually made 5 promises to protect the people's liberty. It's something that I teach at Liberty First University in the history of the Constitution, the 5 promises. But the problem is that kings make promises, but they don't keep them unless you hold a sword at their throat. And the only way to correct a king is rebellion. And so he's saying, look, we're not a kingdom anymore. We're a constitutional republic. So rebellion isn't our only option. We have lots of peaceful, powerful ways to control our government. I know it doesn't feel like it, but they're out there. Jan and I were on her Facebook Live today talking about my book, Sovereign Duty. It's not really my book. It's the founders' book, because our founders actually anticipated a day when our federal government would go outside of its constitutional boundaries. How many of you think the federal government's outside its constitutional boundaries? How many of you think the people that wrote and ratified our Constitution were kind of smart? So we shouldn't be surprised that they actually saw that. I was telling Jan, you know, our founders said they knew human nature. And what happens with liberty always comes prosperity. It's like socialism always comes poverty, liberty always comes prosperity. And when people get prosperous, right, they get pacified in their prosperity. They get lazy in their luxury. They get complacent and compliant in their comfort. And those are the moments that governments and those in power are always waiting for. Oh, look at this prosperity. You can have more. Just let us take care of the details. Oh, don't worry about that. We'll provide that for you. Don't worry about raising your children. Go out and both parents get jobs. We can take care of your kids for you. Oh, don't worry about health care. We'll manage that for you. And with every service and with every dollar adds another link to the shackles of servitude. We have powerful tools. We've just been separated from them. And our founders gave them to us. They put them in writing. They tried to tell us exactly what to do, but we've been duped into looking to them for the solutions to the government they created. So Patrick Henry didn't like this suggestion, and the record says that Patrick gives this great oration. He likes to speak for a long time. And at some point in his speech, he turned and sneered at this delegate and said, "Oh, sir, we'd have fine times indeed if to control tyrants it was only necessary to assemble the people. Your arms wherewith you can defend yourselves are gone. Have you ever read of any revolution in a nation inflicted by those who have no power against those who have all the power?" What is the principle of the right to keep and bear arms? It's about proper distribution of power. It's about saying no to kings. You see, the right to keep and bear arms, that's what this is about. It's not about hunting. It's not about even protecting yourselves from criminals. It's about keeping just government. It's about preserving life and liberty. It's about controlling tyrants. Because you will never eliminate tyranny, nor will you ever eliminate tyrants, nor will you ever eliminate the certain segment of the population that is happy being slaves. But you can't keep them from having power. So who are the militia? The whole body of the people. What is a free state? One where the people out-arm the government, where they are not enslaved by a standing army, where the people govern their government. You see, I get uncomfortable even when people talk about their Second Amendment right. Because your right does not come from the Second Amendment. Here's the problem. Your right to keep and bear arms is an essential natural right. It is essential natural right tied directly to your duty of self-preservation. You see, you have a natural right to live, to liberty, and to property. Now, property is like this huge, bottomless pit that we don't even comprehend today. We think property is like your cell phone and your car and your house. No, it's much, much greater for these people. I have a whole course on the definition of property. But if you cannot defend those things independently by yourself without asking permission, then no other right exists. Here in Alabama, you should think about whether you have a right to keep and bear arms or not. Jan talked a little bit about this, the right or a privilege. I call them permissions. A right is a just claim, a legal title, and ownership, the legal power of exclusive possession or enjoyment. If you have a right to keep and bear arms, you have the exclusive authority to possess it. Exclusive means no one else can tell you. Now, I'm not saying that criminals have the right to bear arms, as long as we define criminality properly. Because I don't believe that you should automatically lose your right to keep and bear arms just because some government deems you a felon. There should have been a huge amen there. But the fact that there wasn't makes me understand that maybe you don't know. In the state of Florida, by example, if you drive without a driver's license 3 times, you're a felon. What does that have to do with your right to keep and bear arms? I failed to pay my tax that gives me their permission to drive on the roads I paid for? And now I'm a felon? How does that make any sense? You see, there are limits to liberty. Our founders, quoting John Locke, said, "Liberty knows no bound other than you cannot harm or control the right of another." The moment you bump into somebody else's liberty, your liberty stops. So when you violate someone else's liberty, you suspend, even sometimes surrender your own. So if I shoot you with a gun, that's my fault it's gone, not the government's right to take it. I gave it up by not loving my brother as myself, by not acting in self-governance and morality. It is a right. Or is it a permission? The act of permitting or allowing. Look at this. An allowance, a license, or a liberty granted. See, if you have to have a license for something, then somebody's granting you permission. And if someone has the authority to grant your permission, what do they also have the authority to do? Do they have to have a reason? Not one that you have to agree with, because what? They are the owners of the permission. You are the possessor of the privilege. Here's your Constitution, by the way. How many of you read your Alabama Constitution regularly? See, here's the funny thing. Here's the funny thing. I mean, our Florida Constitution's bad too. Stick with the Bill of Rights. That's all you really need to know. Because everything else is, if it's contrary to natural law, it's no law at all. That's something we need to get into our brains. That not every law is lawful. That's the whole basis for the sanctuary cities, isn't it? Not every law is lawful. I am so delighted at seeing people finally coming to these conclusions. Every citizen has a what? A fundamental privilege? A fundamental license. Right. You gotta know what that means, because if you don't, then the politicians will teach you something different.
That's right.
See, these red flag laws don't simply violate the Second Amendment. These red flag laws violate your right to property. Look at what James Madison wrote in his essay, Property. Every man has a property very dear to him in his safety and the liberty of his person. That is not a just government, nor is property secure under it, where the property which a man has in his personal safety and personal liberty is violated by arbitrary seizures of one class of citizen for the service of the rest. Do you know what's even more wicked than the fundamental understanding that he had? We define service today as feelings. We give government the authority to take property from people without due process based on the fact that it serves their feelings. And James Madison just flat out tells you, if that's the case, my friends, you do not live in a just government. I mean, that's what we got to wake up to. We got to start identifying these people in government and the style of government they're imposing on us as wicked, tyrannical, oppressive, and unjust. Ms. Publius talked about this amending the Constitution thing. You know what James Madison's one of his biggest concerns about amending the Constitution was? Who will be the delegates that are chosen? I mean, who would argue that a former Supreme Court justice is unfit to come up with an amendment to amend the Constitution? People would look at you like you were nuts if you said that a Supreme Court justice is not fit to be on a committee to amend the Constitution. Now, I'll tell you, Supreme Court justice is probably the least fit. And I better get an amen from Eric over there, too. This is John Paul Stevens, former Supreme Court Justice, 6 amendments and how we should change the Constitution. This is what he wants to say about the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms when serving in the militia shall not be infringed. Who sees a problem with that? Oh, so what you're telling me is you're smarter than a Supreme Court justice? How arrogant. Go ahead and give yourselves a hand, because you are smarter than a Supreme Court justice. Richard Henry Lee, the mind that aims at a select militia must be influenced by a truly anti-Republican principle. Remember, we're learning about principles. Not about words, not about laws, not about facts, about principles. He says, when we see many men disposed to practice upon it whenever they can prevail, no wonder true Republicans are for carefully guarding against it. Now let me give you a disclaimer. He's not talking about the Republican Party. He's talking about a style of government, the Republican style of government, where people govern over their governors and they are not subject to a government over them. He's saying when you have people who say that the right to keep and bear arms is only for those in government, you have people who have clearly classified themselves as anti-Republican or despotic tyrants. Oh, by the way, if I can go back. That's my 13-year-old. If you follow me on Instagram and Twitter and stuff, you'll also see him shooting with his AR. We have a program that we run every year in Texas called In Defense of Liberty, where we have 3 days of training. The first day is constitutional training, right? Because if you're going to keep and bear arms, you got to know why, right? You got to have the knowledge and the virtue to know why you're actually doing it. Then we spend 2 days. The morning session is hand-to-hand self-defense and weapons retention. And then the afternoon session is on the range. And we don't stand and shoot at targets. We shoot under our arms, we shoot behind our backs, we shoot laying on the ground. We shoot in a car, out of a car, running over the top of the car, driving through the car. We shoot and we train in real life situations because the bad guy is not going to stand still with a like a target with a circle on his chest. And if you cannot shoot accurately when your heart rate and breathing is up, you will die in a real life situation. And we do that every year. Our trainer is the most incredible firearms instructor, not to demean anybody that's here. Most credible firearms instructor, his name is Larry Stevenson. He goes by the bearded black cowboy. And if you don't know him, you need to. But if you're interested in joining us in that training, we only have 14 slots every single year. Make sure you get on the website and you find out when they're coming up. It's going to be in September this year. And it's in Texas on Larry's range. Because that's where we can have the liberty to shoot from a car or on our backs or whatever. And I'm talking to Jan about doing it at her range one year. Red flag laws violate the natural right to self-preservation, the right to due process, the right to property, the right of freedom of speech. Did you ever think about that? How red flag laws violate your freedom of speech? Why? Because these red flag laws allow people to flag you and take your property without due process, thrust you in an anti-American system of guilty until proven innocent because somebody thought you were scary. So what happens? Well, maybe you won't talk about politics in public because you don't want to be red flagged. Maybe you won't talk about your religion because some people think Christianity is oppressive. You don't want to be red flagged. You see, when government holds too much power, there is no right that is protected. And human nature says that if it comes down to you living or dying, 9 times out of 10, you will shut your mouth to live. And they will enslave you. In Florida, our red flag law says now if you are the age of 18 to 21, you are a criminal if you own a firearm. Now, at the age of 18 in Florida, you can get married without your parents' permission. You can get a loan to buy a house. You can buy a house. You can own a house. You can be a police officer. You can join the military. You can have a car. But you're a criminal if you have a firearm to protect them. So you know what that means? Everybody in the state of Florida from the ages of 18 to 21 are now slaves to the government. Because see, here's the thing we need to understand. When you do not have an individual right to keep and bear arms, you do not have an individual right to protect yourself, your life, your property, or your family. You are enslaved to whomever you're waiting on to do it for you. See, here's how slavery works. The very definition of slavery is one man owning another man. One man placing a value on another man's life. And on that day, when your life is in danger and you don't have the authority or the legal ability to defend yourself, what they're saying is, when that guy is standing there, you know, the one that's in charge of defending you, decides whether you live or die. And maybe on that day, he decides his life's not worth mine. It's not worth the trouble. It's not worth the danger. And in that moment, that person that's been put in charge to save your life owns you. I mean, how can you not know that? Look at what happened at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School when the officers stood outside and did not go in to help those children. The bottom line was somebody decided those officers' lives were more valuable than the children on the inside. And at that point in time, they reduced the people in that school to slaves. Second-class, invaluable human lives. Oh, how did that get in there? Here's our Florida Constitution. This is really good. The militia consists of all able-bodied citizens of this state and all other able-bodied persons who have declared their intentions of becoming a citizen. The whole body of the people. So here's your solutions. You need a sheriff who's dedicated to preserving the rights of the people. Your sheriff is the most powerful person in your county, and if you don't know that, you need some of my materials on the book on the table over there. Your sheriff can look any federal agent in the face and say, "You have no jurisdiction here, get out." You need county commissioners who are dedicated to preserving the rights of the people, state legislators who are dedicated to preserving the rights of the people, and a governor who's dedicated to preserving the rights of the people. Then, when you have all that, then start working on the federal government. Because all your power is local. We spend way too much time, energy, and resources looking at the federal government. You have no power there. Do you have more power over your governor or the President of the United States? The U.S. Attorney General or your sheriff? So now you know where you should be spending your money and your resources, because this is why. The bottom line is this. There is only one question to be asked in a gun-controlled debate. Just one. And here it is. I believe this is a universal question, because there is a universal principle of a desire to survive. Do you trust that no one will ever use the power and force of government, either now or any time in the future, to try to take your life, your liberty, or your property? So do you? Are you sure?
Yes.
Then the debate's over. There are no other questions. So I am here to disciple you, to give you the tools that you need. And obviously in the hour that I've been here, I can't do all of that. But we have lots of stuff over there to help you. Plus, we'd love to come and teach you, whatever your groups are. We'd like to invite you to any of the trainings that we have all across America. Just contact us. Go to libertyfirstuniversity.com and sign up for our classes. Take home materials today. Don't wait. Don't wait. If you wait 24 hours to do anything after you leave here, human nature says you won't. So as soon as you leave here today, pick up something. Develop your 30-second elevator speech. And start learning to convince and convert. Get rooted in these principles. Because the bottom line is, I'm a selfish woman. I have a 13-year-old boy that I want to live free. And I need your help to do it. God bless you guys. Thank you so much.